Okay, second attempt. Something happened in the first attempt, so I had to cut it after 5 minutes, but here we go again. So this is a spin-off from Jordan's series. If you want more draft content and you haven't seen it, definitely go watch Jordan's because it's gonna be better than this. Definitely wanted to shout him out, but he gave me his blessing to make this video because he liked what I was saying about Slowking and said that he didn't think he was going to make a draftables about Slowking. So draft deep dive number one, maybe of more, Slowking. Okay, so the basics of Slowking and why we love it, because we do love it. I'm gonna have a more, I think, at least the Galarian Zapdos video that Jordan posted a day or two ago was very positive. This is gonna be a very mixed point of view of Slowking, which is why I wanted to make it. I thought it'd be interesting. Um, but we do love Slowking. That is the general perspective, and by we I mean me. Um, yeah. So Slowking is I would say maybe the premier mid-tier trick room setter in most draft leagues, given its tiering. It's got great bulk, so that's why we're looking at the stats here on Showdown. We have the stats page pulled up because the bulk, it's not the highlight, but it's what enables everything else to work. So 95 HP is quite good. It's not spectacular, but it's pretty high. And then that coupled with physical defense is sufficient. It's not fantastic for a physical, I mean, for a bulky trick room setter. It's not fantastic, but it's certainly sufficient. You can live enough stuff, especially with super effective berries. And then the highlight of Slowking, of course, is its special defense. It's especially quite the chunkster. It's not up to the Gudra, Cress, Umbreon level, but it is quite bulky there, and it is quite difficult to knock out without extremely strong uh, super effective attacks, unless if you're attacking it specially, which is very nice. And then another plus, it's got a huge move pool. Um, so water and psychic both have like pretty good stab options. Water has Scald and Muddy Water are the main ones, are both very strong on Slowking. Since if you're like staying around, you could be a pest with burns or accuracy drops. Psychic is good if you have or are playing against psychic terrain. Expanding Force um, does quite a bit of damage, even off the 100 special attack, so that's nice. And then obviously good Trick Room setter, especially with Oblivious. Calm Mind, Nasty Plot, Imprison, so it's got all those like bulky psychic things you want. And then coverage, Power Gem, I believe Thunderbolt, Ice Beam, Flamethrower definitely is a big one. It's got most of the Shadow Ball. It's got most of the types, special moves. It's got yeah. So if you need to be hitting something super effectively, you almost definitely can with Slowking, which is very nice. And then random utility stuff like Yawn, Rain Dance, Recovery, Recover or Slack Off, I believe. It's got a lot of moves. It's got a ton of moves. It's blessed in that way. And then because of that and because of its bulk, a variety of sets are possible. Um, it's not just the moves because you can have a lot of moves. It's also the item. You can run a variety of bulky items, pinch berries, citrus berry, super effective berries, focus sash if you want to go offensive or you can't live something. You're free from using mental herb, which is why Oblivious is so good. And you can really use, I mean, even Life Orb if you want to attack something. That's good in Max, especially. You can actually do some damage with Life Orb. In Max, again, weakness policy, expert belt sometimes. Um, just truly a ton of items you can run, a ton of moves you can run, and then a ton of ways to distribute the EVs. You could go super bulky, you could go mixed bulky offense, you could go super bulky on one side, you could go super defensive, you can go super specially defensive, uh, you can make a stall set. There are just a ton of ways you could use this thing. And then abilities, I would give it a plus plus. So it's like a super strong point of Slowking. Why it outranks most of the um, other mid-tier Trick Room setters is that Oblivious is a fantastic ability. Not having to run Mental Orb frees up Slowking to do a lot of stuff, live a lot of stuff, kill a lot of stuff, maybe that you're not expecting, because it can run different items. So that's a big plus. And then its other abilities are also good. I'm forgetting the name, but the Confusion immune one is pretty good. Um, you can run it with Swagger 1 week for like a surprise win, or Regenerator is just a pretty strong ability. Not as good as in singles, but usable still, especially if you plan on switching Slowking out. And then another plus plus is, sorry, my voice. Sorry, excuse me, sipping water. Sorry. Um, so yeah, Slowking works very well with Intimidate. So it's already super bulky, especially, and it's a little bulky, um, physically, but if you can help it out with that Intimidate, um, something like a Scrafty or an Ensign or I don't know, something ideally that doesn't share weaknesses. Lando, um, is going to be really strong with Slowking because it's going to make it pretty unkillable. And then, I mean, also Reflect and Burn go with that, but Intimidate works really well, especially, yeah, Intimidate just works really well. And then quality TR center, usually for a reasonable price, is another big plus. If you're going to be winning in Trick Room, Slowking is going to win you games because it's going to set up Trick Room. There are too many tools available on a good team to stop Slowking from setting, since you can't taunt it, is basically the issue. And then even if you can knock it out, there are ways to mitigate damage or fake out or follow me or whatever. So Slowking is going to set Trick Room basically unless you have Imprison. And then like kind of helpful, kind of not, or could be helpful situationally. Typing, so Water Psychic, not fantastic, especially defensively. Um, Water is really nice though, and then the water stab moves are really nice. So like Scald and Muddy Water, as I said, are very good. So those can be helpful, and then you're resisting fire, fighting, um, fire and fighting mainly are the big ones, which can be big, especially if you have like a steel type Trick Room Sweeper. Um, those resists can be pretty clutch. But the weaknesses, the reason it's not like a great typing is that there are a lot of weaknesses, which I'll talk more about later. And then another slight positive is you have enough special attack to not be a total non-factor with 100. So like, especially if you're clicking like expanding force, you can't be ignored. And if you're clicking like scalds, you're doing, you're doing decent chip to most things. Um, so Slowking has that over like your Porygons of the world, Porygon 1, not Porygon 2, or other lower tier Trick Room setters that are bulky enough, they can just be total non-factors in terms of attacking. So even though Slowking isn't like a threat, it has enough special attack to not be useless, especially if you can put on an item to assist that. Okay, so here's the quintessential Slowking. And then I titled this Converting Bulk and Support to 1 Games. So this is why Slowking is so good. This is versus Poppin, so sorry Poppin. I'm going to go on fast. Okay, my mouse isn't working. Okay. So, sorry. Okay, so we have Comfey Slowking in DD Porygon lead. So Porygon is super threatening, right? Porygon threatens that probably an Oko, you'd imagine, right? So Instant comes in, that's not going to help out. Indeedee throws out the helping hand. Bang, huge max strike, but I have the sash. So you look at Slowking and you're like, that's a special tank. And then you have Porygon and you're like, wow, I can break this if I have helping hand. But then Slowking can just run sash. Slowking can run basically any item, which is why it can be so good. So that's a big thing here. And then so it sets Trick Room. That's Lucky Crit, but whatever. And then notice how I'm playing against an Indeedee, and I can bring Expanding Force, and I'm doing pretty decent damage actually. I'm doing 30% to a max mon, and obviously Porygon is not super bulky, but that's real damage. Porygon throws at another max strike. Um, so it looks like not much is going on. Slowking just got Trick Room up really, and notice how, yeah, it wasn't able to grab the KO on Magmar, which you would like, but has it done enough to win this game? 2 turns left of Trick Room, and Escav comes in. So what checks Escav on this team? Magmar, that's really it. Regirock's going to struggle. Zapdos can have a fire move, but if I'm steel spiking, it's probably not going to be doing enough. Porygon definitely doesn't check me. Nothing really checks me on this team. I might not be OHKOing Regirock, but Regirock's not doing well. I'm probably OHKOing Oranguru. I'm almost definitely OHKOing Porygon. So how do you get through this? You get through it with Magmar, but Slowking has done enough damage to the Magmar that this Escav really isn't that bothered by it anymore. And then there's the Will-O-Wisp, and notice I'm using Instant, so a lot of physical bulk just by what I have on my team. And then Escav, of course, likes having the water type Slowking, so like this is a really good example of how the team context is really good for Slowking, and you'll just see this is pretty clean. I think Zapdos shows a fire move soon. Zapdos shows Blaze Kick. Yeah, Zapdos shows Blaze Kick, but it's just too late. It has the burn, it's low health, and that's the game. It was a pretty simple game. It looks like it was a pretty simple game for Escav, but what really allowed that? What set up the Trick Room? What damaged Magmar enough that it wasn't a real threat to Escav at any point? That was Slowking. So Slowking set up that win, and that's why Slowking is so good, because it's a pretty elite enabler, even though it's a mid tier. So that's really a good example of how Slowking is used best. Sorry, I'm not good at casting. That was pretty bad, but I've never casted before, so. Okay, so here are the limitations. So we've talked about how much I love Slowking, but what is not as great about Slowking? So I said the special attack was enough to be not a total non-threat, which is true, but Slowking really doesn't have very much offensive pressure. Um, Even with like a life orb, it's not grabbing Okos. Um, so it can not be ignored, but it can be slow paced sometimes. So if your opponent is ready to come play in Trick Room with you, that can be an issue. If your opponent is denying switch-ins of your like main sweeper, you're not going to be getting very much stuff done, stuff like that. Or if your opponent can just keep Slowking on the field sometimes, since it's exerting so little offensive pressure, that can be a decent way to stall out a Trick Room. So that's a major limitation, obviously. And then also Slowking really wants the Intimidate support. It really likes the supplemented physical bulk because that's how it gets really chunky and really hard to kill. Otherwise, stuff like Darkest Lariats, Crunches, Shadow Claws, Power Whips, stuff like that can be really devastating for Slowking. And then I sort of preface this with what I just said. Slowking really, its weaknesses are quite common. You have Ghost, Dark, Grass, and Electric. Those are all pretty strong offensive types. Basically, any team you're going to play is going to have one or multiple of those as like pretty strong stab options. So that's definitely a negative of Slowking, which sort of shows why its typing isn't fantastic. And then I think its biggest limitation, genuinely, is its four moveset syndrome. So Slowking, basically any week, is going to be setting Trick Room or denying Trick Room. Those are its two primary uses. So if you're setting Trick Room, that's already one slot. If you're denying Trick Room, that's Imprison Trick Room, that's two slots. And then if you want both stabs, if you're running an Imprison set, you already don't have any more moves you can use. If you're running a Trick Room set, you only have one more move. And then, um, if Slowking, sometimes it wants Protect. It really often wants Yawn. Sometimes it even wants like Rain Dance, especially if you're running it with something like Escav. Um, it wants Calm Mind, it wants Recovery, it wants all of these things. So four moveset syndrome really hurts Slowking. I found that like on average, your Slowking wants like six moves. Um, so sometimes it can be really difficult to cut those moves, and it can stop Slowking from doing its best job. And then so like I mentioned stab, trick room, and then utility. That doesn't even mention any coverage. So if there's a coverage move you want, you become very, very limited in what you can do sometimes. Okay, so here's the hot take. Slowking is significantly better in max formats. So why do I say this? So in max, there's one negative as I see it, and that's that Slowking faces stronger attacks. Then the positives in max, games are quicker, which seems counterintuitive, but I'll come back to this at the end because it's a major point that I want to make. So weakness policy threat, I would do that as a more slight positive than probably anything on this list. Uh, but it is a weakness policy threat in Dynamax, which gives it some more offensive pressure than it would normally have, which is nice. Um, okay, another positive. Slowking really likes allies Steel Spikes and Quake Boosts. Obviously, other Pokemon like those too, but just because Slowking is so bulky, it really just can take even more advantage of those. Um, and then a big plus of Slowking, especially on the special side, it's bulky enough to eat a max attack. Probably not two, but it's bulky enough to eat a max attack. And I guess if you like switch into a resisted one, maybe two. So it can stall maxes even without maxing itself, which is quite strong. Um, I would argue unique tech is more impactful. So Slowking is like a pretty, I would say, one of the better yawners. So that's obviously a lot better in max. Because a lot of times you're going to want to remove the Slowking before maxing so that you don't get yawned, or just bring an electric move. Which I do have to um, mention like bringing electric moves is very doable, especially because they're super effective into Slowking. So they're like doubly effective at dealing with Slowking. Um, but Yawn is really good, and it's an untauntable Yawner, which makes it really strong. In addition to its bulk, so that is very good in Max. And then so other unique tech stuff like slow rain dance and trick room can honestly be so much more impactful in max because if you're letting like SCAV, like I showed my SCAV game, SCAV benefited a lot by just having Slowking there to like rain dance even. Um, so stuff like that can be a lot more impactful since you have one Pokemon that's maxed and that Pokemon can try to win the game. Um, so those like single turn um, tech options or can really shift the game a lot more, I think. And then obviously setting Trick Room is more important, which helps Slowking and Max also because again it's just easier to win in Trick Room because you can get your knockouts during the Trick Room turns or at least boosts that will help you win the game. Um, so the fact that Slowking is a very reliable Trick Room setter is just it's just simply more valuable in Max, where Trick Room is not an automatic win, but a more automatic win than it is in non-max at least. So in non-max, Slowking gets benefited by facing weaker attacks, so it's has more survivability, but longer games are not as good. which again I'll talk about at the end. And then more fake out is a problem because Slowking, although it can't be taunted, which is nice, it can be faked out. Um, so, sometimes something like a Trevenant with a mental herb is just going to be better than Slowking because um, in such a heavy fake out meta, um, in non-max, it is a real issue for Slowking sometimes. Sometimes you'll want to run Protect for fake out, and then you're getting into your 4 move slot syndrome. Uh, so that's definitely a thing to consider. Um, I think unique tech options are less impactful with Slowking because, setting up a rain dance is probably never winning you a game unless you get like a surprise Oko that's huge. Um, Yawn is good, but I think not as good since you're never yawning a max Pokemon. I think it's almost never going to be as good as it is in max. And then just setting Trick Room is less important. It's much easier to stall out a Trick Room. It's much easier to not have your entire team killed in Trick Room. Um, SCAV isn't getting three defense boosts or 3 special defense boosts. So, um, you know, a lot of times you could just let Slowking set Trick Room, and because its offensive pressure is so low, even lower in non-max, you can stall it out and most of the time be fine. So that's a big issue for Slowking in non-max. Okay, so why is pace of game actually um, favorable to Slowking when it's faster, even though Slowking is bulky? So Slowking is in a very funny position where the longer games go, even though it's super bulky, often I find the more moves it wants. So you're getting back into that 4 move slot syndrome. So like if you want a calm mindset, which is what I was just talking about with Jordan, you're running Trick Room, Water Stab, Psychic Stab, and Calm Mind, basically. Um, and then if you do that, if anything resists both stabs, which I think is pretty common just because Water and Psychic, I don't know, there are a lot of things that resist both. I've found. So, you know, you're not always loving that stab coverage, and then if you're switching off one of the stabs, then Slowking is not so powerful that Slowking is not so powerful that it's going to be like mowing through you with a coverage move. So it starts getting pretty difficult for Slowking because maybe you want Protect, you probably want Yawn at some point, you probably want um, so you want Yawn, Protect, Trick Room, probably want both stabs. You probably want like 3 different coverage moves. So it can be, you might want to recover. So the longer games go, you actually want more moves because there are just so many things that you want Slowking to do, uh, but it just simply can't do all that you ask it to do. And then also, since Slowking is pretty passive, it's usually better as an enabler. And when Slowking is enabling Pokemon, you're basically saying that one of the 4 Pokemon you're bringing is there to enhance the performance of one or more of the Pokemon you bring. And usually those strategies are going to play out pretty quickly. So SCAV sweep, or no, usually you're enabling a sweeper, and if the sweeper isn't able to close out the game quickly, um, you're usually not loving your spot in the game, if that makes sense. Um, and then just I don't know, Slowking feels a lot. It just feels a lot more. The passivity just feels a lot more um, cumbersome in longer games because it can't, you know, you're not going to do something on one move that's going to help an ally win a game. You're going to maybe try to set up over time, but while Slowking is setting up, the opponent can set up too. Like if you're playing like a strong physical type dark type attacker, and they swords dance, you might be in a position where Slowking is +1 special attack, +1 special defense, still can't really threaten the attacker, and then that attacker +2 knockoff, easy OHKO. So it's stuff like that that's really difficult for Slowking. Um, it's just often too slow and not threatening enough, so it can get outscaled. Or while Slowking tries to scale, other things could just kill it. Because again, it's not crest level bulky, it's not Umbreon level bulky, so it's in that sort of weird position. And then Jordan and I were talking about it, Slowking, because he was sort of pushing. He he was agreeing with me slightly, but sort of pushing back on what I had to say. And he was saying, burns, reflect, intimidate really allows Slowking to be pretty, kind of like an immovable object in non-max, which is certainly true. But I think that shows sort of the shift of Slowking in max to in non-max, where in max, Slowking is really working for you. It has a lot of things that it can do to help, any sweeper on your team not steal, take a game, um, and take a game quickly too. Whereas in non-max, Slowking is, if you want to play Slowking, you probably need to play it pretty slow. And if you're going to play Slowking slow, it moves from Slowking helping your team to your team helping Slowking. So, if you can do that, that can certainly be successful. But, um, it's sort of a role change that I think weakens Slowking pretty significantly, honestly, because it goes from one of the better Trick Room support, uh, mixed support mons to, um, a kind of middling bulk mon that you need to supplement a lot of physical bulk for, when you can just have bulk mons that are harder to remove, you know, Registeel, Umbreon, Cresselia, even Uxie. There are just a lot of, you're just not taking it as much advantage of what Slowking has to offer, which a lot of that is the Oblivious Trick Room, is what makes it so good. And because that's weaker, Slowking just feels um, significantly weaker, even though it is still good. Okay, so conclusion. You should still draft Slowking because it's still amazing for its tiering. Still does a lot of stuff that you're going to want. Um, but I think its days as a premier mid-tier setter, trick room setter are gone. Um, I think most max teams, if you just give a Slowking to, if they have a trick room sweeper, it's gonna plug in and just be, pretty quite usable. Um, Now, I think you almost have to draft Slowking with a good intimidate, or a good burn, or something you're going to have setting screens often, specifically reflect. Also, you're going to want to avoid common type weaknesses with the Pokemon you're using. So, like, one of the problems for me this season was that Slowking encouraged people to bring grass moves versus Swampert. So that was an issue, even though I kind of got it to help me with typing a little bit because it's often working with Kaparaja and it resists fire and fighting for Kaparaja, which is nice. Um, but I think it's, like I said, I think the best way I can put it into words is that Slowking, you're going to need to work now more for Slowking than um, it used to work a lot more for you. Um, I hope that sort of distinction I'm trying to make makes sense. Um, but I really do like Slowking a lot. I don't want that to get lost in this. I just think it's an interesting sort of discussion to have on Slowking is sort of how it fares in max versus non-max, because I really do think it's quite a lot better in Dynamax, just because if you're giving yourself a move pool of Trick Room, Water, Psychic, +1, that +1 can just be a lot more impactful in Dynamax, because in non-max, if you're adding like Calm Mind, you might also want Protect and Yawn if you're lengthening the game like that. Um, so it's just something to think about, um, in terms of how we think about Slowking. We see a bulky mon and we assume that it likes the slowing of pace, but I really think it's more suited for a faster paced gameplay. Even if it's not the best maxer itself, it's just so good at supporting max mons that I think it really excels in those formats. All right, I hope this was somewhat interesting.